faces. If this is your first one, we do this every second Wednesday of the month, and the goal is to have trainings, have fun, and network. So it's just a really casual hour that we spend together each month. We have some really good topics coming up. March is AmeriCorps month, AmeriCorps week. So we are having AmeriCorps across West Virginia. So if you know anyone interested in joining AmeriCorps, or if you're just curious about it, that'll be a really great webinar for you all to join. In April, we're going to be talking about recruiting volunteers online for National Volunteer Month. And then in May, we're going to put the fun in fundraising. And these webinars are always free, and you can sign up on our website. So today's topic is Valentine's Day themed, and I like to think that volunteers are love in motion. So we're going to be talking about volunteer recognition. So to start off with, we're just going to chat a little bit about why volunteer recognition is important and what role it plays in volunteer management. And then our second part, we're going to be talking all about the 2022 Governor Service Awards, which will be coming up in June. And we're going to be explaining how easy it is to nominate a volunteer for that. And then we're going to close out our time together with 5 easy and inexpensive ways to recognize your volunteers. So I'm going to pass it on to Christina now, and she is going to get us started and explain why volunteer recognition is important.
Dana. First thing we're going to do is get a feel for who is on our call today and talk about how many people volunteer with your organization. So hopefully you see that poll question popping up on your screen, whether you're using a computer or a phone, and we can kind of see where everybody is in terms of maybe smaller volunteer organizations or larger volunteer organizations. The gist is pretty much the same, whether you're working with a small group of volunteers or a large group of volunteers, but we wanted to get a feel for who's in the room and what size groups you guys are working with. So we'll just keep that open for a couple more seconds. We've got about 20 people have voted so far. So that's pretty good. You guys are paying attention and on it today. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and share the results with you guys so we can see as a group where everybody stands. So we have a pretty good spread across the board of the different size of organizations that are attending today to talk about volunteer recognition. Some smaller organizations that have just 1 to 10 volunteers, which is really common in West Virginia, where we have really rural communities that are working with organizations that might be fully run by volunteers, right, with no paid staff, a lot of mid-sized volunteer programs, and then 5 large volunteer programs with over 100 volunteers. So kudos to you guys for working with that many volunteers. That's awesome. We wanted to start off with this conversation about why volunteer recognition is important, because it is, right? Before we get to thinking about recruiting volunteers and keeping them, when we're talking about volunteer recognition, we want to make sure we know why it's important to be talking about. Thanking volunteers is an important part of managing and retaining volunteers, especially during the pandemic and when it can seem like such a chore just to recruit volunteers. Always remember that thanking them and engaging the volunteers that you already have is a huge piece of managing them and keeping them on as satisfied volunteers. We have a nice little graphic here of your steps to volunteer management. Love to put things in a visual format for people to see. As you can see, the first step in volunteer management is obviously recruiting our volunteers. Next, we always process them and onboard them into our organization, make sure they're a right fit for whatever the volunteer need might be. Then, of course, our volunteers go through training, whether that's an informal training or a formal training. We are always communicating with our volunteers and supervising them throughout the term of their volunteer service. And sometimes it's easy to forget this crucial piece of recognizing our volunteers so that they stay in this loop. We're here today to talk about different like Dana said, cost-effective ways to recognize our volunteers, make them feel good about being a part of our program, and keep them connected to our missions, right? And just to reiterate, thanking volunteers is especially important during the pandemic that now we're going into year 3 of living through. We know it's exhausting for, the beneficiaries of our programs, for program managers, and for volunteers alike, but for people to be continually committed to their volunteer service, whether it's big or small or in person or virtual, is truly a feat. So just wanted to reiterate that. We have a short video here that an organization, I believe it's out of California, has made about their volunteer program. And to kind of get our time started today, I want you guys to consider this question, and you can even answer in the chat box as we are watching the video, of if you were a prospective volunteer of this organization, how would watching this video make you feel?
How do I feel about volunteers is an easy one to answer. They energize me. They make my life fulfilled every day.
Yeah, I'm humbled by our volunteers on a day-to-day basis. They really are the face of our organization and the community. They are dedicated, they are passionate, they put hours into the work that they do to prepare themselves for going out into our community.
I have seen how other adults and youth both thrive, and it is solely because of a volunteer.
And I would highlight the teen volunteers. They're amazing. So teens have been teaching to adults, teaching teachers, teaching to after-school program staff.
Recently, I had an opportunity where I was working with volunteers, and the group really appreciated it. They had the kids come up to the front of the room and gave them a big applause, and honored them for giving back to their group.
Volunteer appreciation is a key component of volunteer management and programs. We have things like barbecues where we invite our volunteers and their families and their children who really are sharing of their loved one to give to us so much time in the community. We do things like award ceremonies for our volunteers. We nominate them for state and regional and national awards.
We actually honor them at the end of the program. We provide the volunteers with certificates of appreciation, and they're able to get their name called and walk up and get their picture taken just like the participants.
I love to pick up the telephone and call volunteers. I think in today's age of computers and emails, some of us forget that personal touch. So I do a lot of small letter writing, note writing, and I pick up the telephone and just say thank you for the event you went to last week.
And I have like a stack of thank you cards like ready to go to say thank you for this, and it was great to see you. In April, we organized a volunteer recognition dinner. It was put on by staff, tablecloths, great dinner, and whether volunteers received awards or not, every single volunteer that attended walked away with a present, so it's like we appreciate you in so many ways.
Whenever I'm meeting with volunteers, the biggest takeaway that I want them to receive is how much I appreciate them, how grateful I am for the time that they're contributing and the impact that they're making in the community.
I highly respect the fact that they are giving of their own personal time, many of them hundreds of hours a month and a year, without any pay. And many of them don't ask for any recognition, but it's still fun to give them a lot of recognition.
Loving reading in the chat box some of the thoughts you guys have had watching that video, and you guys are feeling some of the same things that I'm feeling. If I was somebody looking for a place to volunteer and I see this video, I'm like, wow, looks like they really care for their volunteers. It looks like they don't take them for granted. They really appreciate the work that they're doing. They keep in touch with them. Sign me up, like what Tina said. And I think that's really important to remember. A lot of times we think about that cycle of volunteer management and volunteer appreciation or recognition kind of feels like the last step. in volunteer management. Like that's at the end after our volunteers have done their service, and it might be considered kind of like an extra, but we all need to remember that it's really that mid-life cycle of your volunteers. It keeps your volunteers engaged and satisfied with their experience, and it can even attract new volunteers to your program. So keep that in mind as we move through the rest of our time together today. I'm going to pass it back to Dana to lead us through this chat box question and our next section of our presentation.
All right, so we are curious, if you recognize volunteers at your organization, how do you do it? So just take a second and think about it. Maybe you plan a dinner or an awards ceremony. So we'd be curious to see what organization you're with and how do you recognize your volunteers? So I'm just taking a second to read the answers. We have lots of good ideas in the chat box, from annual cookouts to handwritten thank you notes, which is one of my favorite ways to recognize volunteers because it only takes a second and it's so inexpensive. And Christina said really well, with lots of thank you and appreciation for your hard work, cakes, awards, and cards. So that's just a few ideas to get your brain turning about how you already recognize volunteers at your organization. And then we're going to share a few more ideas as we move through our presentation today. So one of the easiest ways that we want to talk about today to recognize your volunteers is by nominating them for Governor Service Awards. And we're going to share just a little bit about how this works. The award ceremony will be held on June 16th in Charleston at the Culture Center. And we host this event annually at Volunteer West Virginia to recognize volunteers throughout the state. So since you all are here today, we wanted to give you a sneak peek of the award ceremony so you know what it would look like. So this is a really great picture of our last award ceremony. These are all the different awardees, and they represent individuals and groups throughout the state, and we'll share a few of their stories as we move through these slides. And when you are a nominee and you receive the award, you get to invite all your friends and family to a dinner. So here's a really great picture, and you can see how pretty it is in the Culture Center. And then there's an award ceremony as well that evening. And then here's another picture just to kind of make it easier in your mind to see what it looks like. So when you receive your award, you come to dinner, you invite your friends and family. And my favorite part is that you have a video shown about your volunteer service. So we've picked out one or two of these videos to share with you so you can hear about the previous recipient stories. And we're going to share a story about John 6 from Parkersburg right now.
It's amazing. The community's amazing. I mean, I know I won this award, but I feel like it's our award, this community's award.
He's a cheerleader. He's upbeat. People love to respond to him, and we all do. As you can see, John is a master at acquiring donations of all shapes and sizes and quantities. John touches people on a daily basis. Whether or not they're aware of that, whether or not they realize his involvement, he's genuine. His heart is bigger than the whole community. Very selfless. It's not for self-promotion. That is not what John is about. It's that he truly cares about all the passions that he gets involved with this. And people recognize that. They know that the genuine aspect, and they're willing to give. We would have a void in our community without friends like John 6.
He has been incredible in getting support for the closet, not only with the Pack the Back event, but with getting volunteers. We provide them a shopping experience in Kelly's Closet where they get to choose. It's a little bit of self-worth, just normalcy, to be like other kids, to be able to go shopping and pick things out like other kids get to do. I don't think we would be having a Pack the Back event without John. We wouldn't have the resources to do it or the volunteers to be able to put it on.
Our initial project was the Spot Clinic, which is our spay-neuter clinic. We had raised hundreds of thousands of dollars on this. We were reluctant as a board to continue, to start, without all the money in place. John urged us to start. He said the public will support if you will break ground. We broke ground, and he was right. The clinic has done over 37,000 spay-neuters since its inception, which was the fall of 2013. The goal of the clinic is to reduce pet overpopulation. John has done a lot, and he does a lot for adoptions, and he's just incredible. The organization may function as well, but it certainly wouldn't have nearly the monetary donations and the amount of fundraising. It would take us years longer without his support.
I come from a very loving family. We didn't have a whole lot growing up, but we had love. And my dad taught us, as well as my mom, share it, help others. I have the resources of great friends. And if I can put the need out there, they want to help. But sometimes they're busy. They don't know the need is out there. What we do is we have a wall. Everyone seems to call those our magic shelves. And when we finish one project, we start another one. I get a lot of self-gratification out of it. Just knowing that not I, but it's we that are making a difference in this community. I could not do it without friends.
So that's just one of our recipients. And I know all of you on today's webinar have volunteers like that in your organization. So we're just going to talk a little bit about how to nominate your volunteers so you can share their story, just like John's. Oh, and I just wanted to tell you, I forgot, if you really love that video of John, we have all of them in a collection on our YouTube channel. And Christina will send these slides out after today's call, so you don't have to worry about taking notes, and then you can click on that link if you want to watch more videos. So here are some of our top tips for how to nominate a volunteer for the Governor Service Awards. And just general information, the nomination form can be found on our website. And if you have any trouble finding it, you can just send me an email. And if you want a paper form, we can also send that to you in the mail. My biggest tip would be to just print the form out at your office or your home, because it's a lot easier to look at printed, and then you'll be able to fill it in. So I put my email address in there in case you have problems finding it. And the deadline for nominations is March 25th, so you have quite a bit of time to put this together. So once your form is complete, you're going to mail it to Volunteer West Virginia. And just as a general tip, no more than 3 nominations can be submitted by the same nominator. So you can nominate up to 3 people for a Governor Service Awards. And one of the biggest focuses is that each year it focuses on the year. So for all the categories except for lifetime achievement and COVID-19, you're going to want to focus on how your volunteer made an impact in 2021. That's a good tip to put in the back of your mind. And awards are not always given in all the categories, but also on the other hand, more than one award may be given per category. And posthumous nominations are not eligible. So that means if there was someone in your community that passed away and you wanted to nominate them, you wouldn't be able to do that for this particular award. So we have about 6 or 7 categories this year, and you'll see the breakdown here, and this will help you kind of get an idea in your mind of who you want to nominate at your organization. We have a youth category, we have adult, senior, a group, and a group's really a breakout category. So for that, you could nominate a group of volunteers at an organization. So for example, if you're at the Habitat for Humanity, you could nominate a group of volunteers there. You can do a volunteer team. So if you have a team of neighbors that got together to clean up a local cemetery or to pick up garbage in the streets. That would be kind of what that would be, a family. And families have won before. It's always really interesting and a really good story to share. And then a business as well. That's another category. So if you have a business in your community that goes above and beyond and spends their time volunteering, that would be a really great option for the group category. And then our last two categories, like I mentioned before, these two categories don't have to be in 2021. It can be throughout the person's life for lifetime achievement and throughout COVID-19 for the COVID-19 category. And when you submit your application, we'll check to make sure that they haven't received an award in the last 10 years, or if you're curious and you have a hunch that maybe your volunteer has received an award, you can send me an email and we'll double check. And then the last bullet point here probably doesn't apply to you all, but it's just good to know that staff at Volunteer West Virginia and the governor's office are not eligible to receive an award or submit a nomination. So here we get into the nitty-gritty. I bet that's why a lot of you are on today's call, and we're going to do a few tips from the nomination form. So it's pretty easy to do. You only need to include 3 aspects, and the first one is the official nomination form, and that's the electric form that's on our website, electronic. The second part is a 500-word statement, and the third is supporting materials. And we're going to break those down a little bit to help you all understand that. So the nomination form is pretty simple. You can see it here on the right-hand side of the page. This is going to be your contact information and the contact information for who you're nominating. There's also verification. So when someone receives the award, we call and we check with all their references to make sure everything lines up. And then it's just really great because when you talk to their references, you learn even more about that person. So you might put that in the back of your mind. Who do you want your references to be? And maybe give them a heads up that you're nominating someone for an award. And then the last little blip here is the summary. And that's just going to be 1 or 2 sentences that highlight what your volunteer does. So for example, John 6, whose video we watched just a few moments ago, his summary was, John was a master of acquiring donations in his community. Over the past year, John has been able to receive over X amount of donations. So something just really short and simple that summarizes why you're nominating your volunteer or volunteer group. The second is the 500-word statement. And this is actually the trickiest part, and it's also the easiest thing you can do. So my biggest tip here is just to answer the questions. So when you open up your nomination form, you'll see here on the right, there's a yellow box, and there are 5 bullet points. Each of those contain different questions, and all you have to do is answer them. And I know this seems pretty intuitive, but a lot of the times, it's easy to forget, and we get a lot of forms that actually don't answer all of these questions, and this is how they are kind of organized and scored. So you can even take each one of these headings, for example, community need and answer your question, and then achievement, and kind of break it down like that in your 500-word summary and just do it by the headings. And then it makes it really organized and easy for the reviewers to look at, and then it contains all the information that we're looking for. So that is my biggest secret, not secret tip, is just to answer these questions and the yellow box for your 500 words. And then if you do that, you're gonna have a really great nomination form, and it's gonna paint a really clear picture of your volunteer. Because I know about, if I was nominating someone, you kind of know who that person is. So it's actually kind of difficult to write about them, right? Because you assume that everyone knows what you do. So you kind of have to step outside of yourself and explain their achievements. So someone new can learn about this volunteer. Because I know all your volunteers are amazing, but sometimes it's just as simple as answering those questions really clearly to paint a good picture of who they are. And then the last component are the supporting materials. And this is where you can get creative, and you're not going to want to skip this part because it's really going to add value to your application. So some ideas that are really good for this is an impact story. So maybe you have one of the students at your community center write a story about how this volunteer mentor changed their life. Or maybe your director shares a nice story about all their achievements and accomplishments. So a really nice story can go a long way, and it really touches your heart. And then you're going to want to have a photo of your volunteer and maybe a really nice caption of what they're doing. A lot of people like to include personalized letters. So examples would be a letter from a mayor or your local senator. And these are always really nice. And if you want to do these, I would recommend making them really personalized. So not a form letter, but something that'll add to your application packet. So a really personal story in there always goes over really well. And then news articles are also really great because, like I said, it helps to paint a clear picture of who your nominee is, which can be challenging, but you have to pretend like you've never met this volunteer before and really share all the wonderful things that they're doing, which would be their accomplishments and really nice stories about what makes them above and beyond, because each category usually has one recipient or two. So there's not a lot of nominees that get selected, so you really have to highlight why they go above and beyond. Let's see, highlight their accomplishments. So for example, that would be meals served, number of students helped, and this would be for that volunteer in particular, not necessarily your organization. So that always really helps. And then explain what makes your nominee so special. So once you do those 3 parts, you're gonna staple it, put it in a big old envelope and mail it to us. And it's really that simple. It'll only take a few days, and we try to make the process as simple as possible. And then you're going to mail it to our office here in Charleston, and then your form will be complete. So before we move on, we just wanted to share one more story. And this really highlights why volunteerism is so important and so contagious. And Nancy is such a wonderful woman. She's from Lewisburg. And when she received this award, she didn't even think what she was doing was special. She didn't even want it. She said, "I'm not special. Can we give it to someone else?" And I'm sure some of you have these type of volunteers at your organization that don't even want to be recognized, but sometimes they have the best stories. So we're going to end with Nancy Harris's story from Lewisburg.
I enjoy being on the Greenbrier River Trail every day of the year. I love riding my bike here. It is a most beautiful place to be, and I wanted to give back to this trail that's given me so much in the way of physical and mental health. What's really neat about volunteering is that it's contagious, and so as people would see me cutting trees out of the way when they fell on the trail or cleaning the bathrooms, they'd stop and help. And pretty soon I noticed that people who had previously complained that why isn't somebody else clearing the trail were doing their part to clear the trail too. People just volunteer. They see this old lady out on the trail picking up branches, or cleaning the bathroom. It's a wonderful part of human nature. They wanted to help. And pretty soon they're doing it whether I'm there or not.
Nominating Nancy for this award was something that we were all very excited to do because there's no job or task that's too small or too large for her to take on. She always has a ton of ideas about what we can do to make things better and how to improve the trail.
In the last year, I've worked with a group of volunteers, wonderful people, none of whom knew each other, and we've built 2 shelters on the trail and a bathroom, and working with them has probably been the most rewarding thing of all.
Nancy's just one of the most incredible people and volunteers I've ever run across. She just never turns down doing something, you know. She writes grants. She's willing to clean toilets, and she comes out. I mean, it's crazy. She comes out and cleans up the trail. She pulls together a crew. It's like she's like magic.
And I also do my best to pick up every stone and every stick that is in the way that could potentially be a hazard for other people on the trail. I have cleaning supplies in my backpack, and I normally have a broom and a Swiffer and a saw, a hand saw, because there are often small trees that I can cut out of the way, or I can cut small branches on big trees to make a path until the maintenance crew can get there.
I am almost never on the trail without seeing Nancy. Sometimes I think she lives on the trail. No one knows more about this trail than Nancy, not even the park superintendent.
Places like this can't exist without the help of people who care about them. And she's just a shining example of it. It's very important to show people how to care for a place like this.
All right, so I hope you all enjoyed Nancy's story as much as we did. I know all of you have Nancy's at your organization, and that this webinar helps to inspire you to nominate a volunteer. So as we move on, we'd be curious to hear in the chat box if you're planning to nominate a volunteer or a volunteer group for the Governor Service Awards. If you're planning, let us know, and then we'll be on the lookout for your application. And you have plenty of time until March 26th to send it, March 25th to send it to us.
That video was so awesome. I can't believe she carries cleaning supplies with her at all times on the trail. That is wonderful.
So as we close this out, we're gonna have questions at the end. This is really cool. All the nominees will receive a certificate from the governor. So even if your nominee is not awarded the Governor Service Awards, they're gonna get a really nice certificate in the mail. And we will post a list of the recipients on our website by May 2nd. So if you're curious to see if you have been selected, you can check it there. And then another big tip is just to take your time. You have until March 25th. And now I'm going to pass it on to Christina, and she's going to share 5 easy ways to recognize your volunteers.
Thanks, Dana. I'm seeing in the chat box, we have several folks that are planning on nominating someone or nominating a group, which I think is really cool. That group category really has a lot of possibilities. And especially in the last 2 years, so many community businesses and organizations have really stepped up to meet needs in the community. So I can't wait to read these nominations. As we close out, we are going to talk about 5 easy ways to recognize your volunteers. So that's in addition to nominating them for a Governor Service Award through our office at Volunteer West Virginia. Some of you guys are already doing some of these things, as you mentioned earlier when you shared in the chat box ways that you are recognizing your volunteers, but hopefully you find something new and exciting that you can implement going forward. Before we get to our 5 top tips, we have one more poll question, and this question is about how frequently you are recognizing or thanking your volunteers. There are no wrong answers, there's no right answers, different programs that make sense to do different things, but we wanted to get a feel for the frequency in which you're recognizing them. So some might be doing weekly recognition, thank you notes, or calls. Some might be doing an annual event, and that's really the only time that you're connecting with your volunteers to thank them. Or, and again, no wrong answers. Some organizations might not have got to the volunteer appreciation or recognition point, and that's totally okay. So I'll give you guys a couple more seconds to chime in here with how frequently you're recognizing your volunteers, and then we'll kind of see where everybody stands and share some tips. We have a good spread of answers to this question. A good amount of people are recognizing their volunteers weekly, which is awesome. That takes a lot of time. I know as a former manager of volunteers in my AmeriCorps role, that is a big job to not only manage the volunteers and make sure the work is getting done, but to make sure you're setting time aside to acknowledge and thank your volunteers. So good job to you guys that are doing that on a weekly basis. And then we have a good amount of people that are doing it quarterly and annually as well. So that is also awesome. Thank you guys for sharing that. Our first tip to recognize your volunteers, many of you guys are doing this already, but thank you notes or thank you letters are incredibly valuable to volunteers. I find that most people that manage volunteers are also very active volunteers themselves. And so you kind of know what might be the most meaningful or impactful ways to be appreciated. But we had a little bit of a twist on this thank you letter idea, is that you could reach out to communities that your volunteers serve, so maybe beneficiaries of your program, and ask them to write really short thank you notes that you can pass along to your volunteers. I've seen this in action when I used to work really closely with the Raleigh County Senior Center, and they had a Meals on Wheels program, and getting a note from the volunteer manager saying thank you for your time is one thing, but to get a note from the senior that you're delivering a meal to saying thank you is kind of a whole nother thing. And a lot of times the beneficiaries of your programs do want to be able to be a part of acknowledging and thanking those that are serving them. So that is definitely an idea. Here is a highlight of some folks, Natasha Keating and Sky Dexter, who are AmeriCorps members at New Roots Community Farm in Fayetteville over in Fayette County. They did a volunteer appreciation event where they wrote thank you notes and gave some gift certificates to their farm collective to thank them for a successful growing season. So we know not everybody can provide monetary gifts or donations to their volunteers, but they actually utilized their program and their organization to provide a reward for their volunteers for all of their hard work. And we love this pun on their note. This production season wouldn't have been possible without you. We know that probably brought a huge smile to their volunteers' faces. Another really easy idea to recognize your volunteers is to do a social media volunteer spotlight. You can do these as frequently as you'd like to. I know some organizations are more active on social media than others, but it certainly is worthwhile to put together a couple of posts to highlight your volunteers and what they're doing. That makes it really easy for them to share with their family and friends and have a little pride in their volunteer service, as well as spread the word about the opportunity. I know I've shared some of the volunteer services that I do with fostering dogs, and you guys will bet your bottom dollar every time I share a picture of me with a cute puppy, people want to know how to get involved. And so it can be doubly effective for recognizing your volunteers and potentially recruiting their friends and family to volunteer alongside with them. So in this example, we have a volunteer spotlight of Bruno, who is volunteering at Food Sharing Copenhagen. They list his motivation, a little volunteer profile. So why he wanted to volunteer with this organization, the skills that he has, and his impact. So again, this is a really easy way to recognize your volunteers. A weekly volunteer spotlight or even a monthly volunteer spotlight in your newsletter or on your social media is a good goal to shoot for. Another way to recognize your volunteers are some really cute and cheap volunteer appreciation gifts. You can do these for very low cost. All of these ideas that we're highlighting here are purchased from the dollar store. One of them has a little tea bag that says loyalty. Your dedication and devotion make you a reliable friend. You could easily put volunteer right there. You can always be counted on in a pinch. How cute would that be for a little Valentine for your volunteers in the next couple of weeks? There's also little candies. Thank you for all the extra work that you do. I meant to tell you how much I appreciate you. Again, all of these can be found at a dollar store and you can go a long way with a little bit of funds or donations to make this happen for your volunteers. Here we have Mountaineer Area Rescue Group, who thanked their volunteers by surprising them with a beanie. I know it kind of blends in with the red truck behind, but in the center here, it's a bright orange beanie. And this team is actually going to use these beanies while they're doing their search and rescue volunteer efforts throughout the winter. So That's a little bit of a bigger gift for their volunteers. Another tip is to make sure that you are subscribed to our newsletters and our communications at Volunteer West Virginia, because sometimes we have mini grant opportunities for volunteer recognition. So we have several groups that were able to purchase gifts like this from a mini grant from us at Volunteer West Virginia to make sure their volunteers are appreciated. We love those beanies. Another way to recognize your volunteers is a certificate from the governor. So Dana mentioned that all of the nominees for the Governor Service Awards are going to receive one of these certificates. But if you don't, or if you already have nominated your 3 people and you can't nominate any more, but you want to ensure that your volunteers are getting these certificates from the governor, you just have to go to this website, which is linked in the slides that I'm going to be sending out after today's presentation. And you can request a certificate through a website that will be mailed to your volunteers. I had never heard about this before, and I work at Volunteer West Virginia, and I've been involved with volunteer services in West Virginia for several years. So I am definitely looking forward to taking advantage of this really small but pretty wonderful certificate program that we offer through the governor's office. And our 5th tip is to hold a virtual volunteer recognition event. We have done this with our AmeriCorps members, and we always have so much fun. We know it might be a little bit intimidating to host an online event, but it is a very cost-effective way to get people together, to eliminate any concerns about gathering or for health reasons, and to eliminate any costs associated with travel or just people scattered around a remote rural area. You can do fun getting to know you games. Sometimes we like to call it speed dating. If you have a group of volunteers that might not know each other very well, you can just share funny getting to know you questions like, if you had to eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? Silly things like that, and give people the opportunity to get to know one another. You can play games. We've played bingo online. We've also played trivia. I think it would be really fun to do a trivia about your organization, or maybe about your region or your area that your organization serves, as a way for volunteers to network and get to know each other while also learning a little bit more about your organization and your mission. Or you could do a volunteer recognition award ceremony on a virtual platform. So you could make this an annual event to kind of get people excited for it, in addition to events you're already having, or maybe it's replaces something that you're already doing. But we love this idea to get people together even throughout the pandemic and make sure we're recognizing our volunteers. Here's an example of some AmeriCorps Vista members from West Virginia through the Community Development Hub who met virtually to celebrate their accomplishments through their service. As you can see, they all were mailed little backpacks, and they opened them up and were showing them off to each other during their time together. So we have one more opportunity to chime in the chat box, and we would like to know, after today's webinar with the different things that we've shared, how do you plan to recognize your volunteers? So if there's one thing that you have on your to-do list as you're walking away from our time together today that you're going to do, what might that be? And as everybody's thinking about their one action item for recognizing their volunteers, we'll also be happy to take any questions you might have about any volunteer recognition tips or about the Governor Service Awards that are coming up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
One of the things that I plan on doing with the West Hammond Community Hope Center is to do an appreciation dinner for all of our volunteers who have not only volunteered time, but supplies and different things to make this community center actually happen. We're actually just getting started with some of the services that we plan on providing for the community. Over the last 5 years, we've been working on this building, and it's equipped with a place to have outdoor music, gospel sings, bluegrass, etc. Equipped with walking track and a green field. All this has been made possible, including the building, through small grants and individuals doing a lot of the work for practically at cost or below cost. And then I just feel that a nice dinner for all of them to be able to come together and show their appreciation for each other.
That sounds like a wonderful idea.
And I love that. Christina, I don't know about you. Sorry if I cut you off, but when I was an AmeriCorps member, I felt like it was always so easy to get food donated, especially if it's for volunteers. So Clayton, you might even be able to have someone donate food for your dinner, because it sounds really nice.
I think we can get part of it donated at least.
That's awesome. Congratulations on building that community center and working so hard on that. That's truly an accomplishment.
It's more of a church outreach type building and everything, but it's designed to help everyone within our community in the entire county. We were also trying to include a small farmers market on the premises.
Oh, that's incredible. It's amazing. I have not lived in West Virginia my whole life, but one thing that I've noticed about West Virginia and since I've moved here is, especially in some of the faith-based communities, people don't even realize they're volunteering. They're just doing what they've always done and contributing to the community in really amazing, huge ways. And it's almost like they don't recognize themselves how big of an impact they're making when it comes to things they're doing with their church or for the community outside of their church. But that's so awesome. You guys have put that together for the community.
Yeah, we're doing the best we can with what we have.
That's awesome. Can't wait to hear how your dinner goes.
I'm sure it'll go over well.
I see a couple of other notes coming through about the governor's certificates. That's wonderful. You guys are planning on requesting some of those for your volunteers. Those would pair great if you're already planning an award ceremony or an opportunity to get together. We did have a question about if you can have those mailed to your organizations, that you can present those to your volunteers, and you can. So just put your mailing address instead of theirs and it will come to you.
So we were just giving it one more second, but it looks like we answered all your questions. So we must have done a great job today. Good job, Christina.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, it seems like we don't have too many more questions. So before everyone logs off for the day, I am going to put our feedback survey link in the chat box. It will only take you 2 or 3 minutes to fill out this survey for us, but we love offering these free training webinars for residents of West Virginia, especially those that are working with volunteers. So if you have any ideas for future trainings or topics you might want us to discuss, please make sure you fill out that feedback survey so that we can get that on our list. I see Christine has a question about the governor's certificates. That's actually not on our website, I believe, but the link is in these slides. And if we can find it in time, we'll try to share it in the chat box now, but I will be sure to email the slides out that has the link to the website where you can request those governor's certificates.
Let's see, Christina, I'm going to put that link in the chat box for you all. And there's actually a lot of cool stuff you can do on there. You can request a greeting, a proclamation, or a certificate. And this is all on the governor's website. So you have lots of different options. So I'm going to paste this link in the chat. And then now you all have it.
Perfect. That's a great resource. Thanks, Dana.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone. We want to be respectful of your time. Thank you once again for joining us for our Volunteer West Virginia Wednesday. We hope to see you in March for our AmeriCorps Across West Virginia session. That's going to be incredibly fun to highlight what AmeriCorps members are doing across the state. You don't want to miss it. And until then, we hope you have a great rest of your month and a happy Valentine's Day. See you all later.